Oh, really? We like spent a whole bunch of time toilet papering our front yard with our mischievous leprechaun and me, toilet papered our front yard. Was that it?
Great one, just wants to be sucks.
Oh, no.
Because the joyness of yesterday, the root of today.
I know, right? That is tough. I have a lot of Irish heritage, but I didn't necessarily give into my Irish heritage. I ate a lot of candy instead, which I'm sure isn't too surprising, but it was a little bittersweet this year. My 11-year-old, we had to like have the talk with her, not the sex talk. That's for my next class, right? But the like holiday talk. We hadn't had it yet. Like, and she's like, I've known for 2 years, but she didn't tell us. Like, we had this whole like, did you know that do you know anything about St. Patrick's Day and Christmas and Easter and all those things? She's all like, I don't know what you're talking about. She totally played it off. And I cried. It was so sad to me because she's my oldest. And like, I still think of her as like 4 for some reason. And she's like, I've known for a while. I'm like, when did you know? She's like 3rd grade. I'm like, oh no, okay. She's in 6th now. We're like, we knew that she knew. She's such a like, she's so the kid that would have like pretended she didn't know until she was like 20. But it was crazy. She's like, give us some sign that you know. And all she was like, Sigma. Okay. We're like, what does that mean? And she's like, Sigma. I was like, okay, we're not gonna sit up. Didn't want to hurt her feelings and was shy. We'll talk. But then she got to come outside with us and like completely screw up the yard and the house, and that was kind of good. It was sad. I was like I might like twins still, I think. I hope. I mean, they're in 4th grade, so maybe not, but it's kind of a sad one. Yeah.
I was actually just gonna ask, like, you toilet paper your own, isn't that like a massive pain to clean?
Yes, we made the kids come to that, which is funny. So she had to toilet paper the house.
So it's like a.
And then go out and
leprechaun
clean it up.
house, all this mist, it's like, oh no, now we gotta clean it up.
Yeah, so they love and hate their leprechaun patches of hooligan. But yeah, we make a huge mess and then we have to clean it up. It's kind of productive. But oh, that was a little sad. Other than that, it was fun, but that's a little bittersweet. And then 5 days. I'm so excited. I didn't make it through this week, right? Ready for spring break, for sure. I have a bunch of reminders. I'm gonna wait till the end just in case we have a few more people show up so I don't have to go over it again. But I wrote a bunch of stuff up here about the paper, about the exam, and kind of next week. As I mentioned, I'll talk about that at the end. I want to make sure that everything is clear in terms of like our coming classes and days and all that kind of stuff. So I'll talk about that in the end of our class today, and we'll go back to where we left off, which was here, right? We spent a lot of time talking about some of these causes of eating disorders, and kind of want to do a little bit more here, and then we'll keep going. But we have the rest of this chapter, and then we'll get started on chapter 10 after that. But as we were talking about, there's a lot of psychological factors: depression, low self-esteem, control. Interpersonal factors like Addison, right? Bullying, teasing, family dynamics, all that kind of stuff. Biological factors, we didn't talk about too much either, but sometimes people can be more genetically prone to eating disorders, right? As I jokingly said, your genes determine the size of your genes. There are some issues biologically that can kind of drive this a little bit, but it can't be purely biological, right? Or it'd be more of a medical issue. This one is huge though. The cultural and societal factors, I would say, is just as big as like the interpersonal ones, and they kind of build on each other a little bit. Our culture has very narrow definitions of beauty, right? For men and for women, and we're very like dichotomized in like men versus women like ideas. For women, as we've talked about, it's being thinner and thinner and thinner, and men being more like muscular and bigger. And so when people don't see themselves represented in the media, it tends to have this like effect of kind of subtly sinking in and making you feel like you're not attractive or you're not good enough or you're overweight. And what's so fascinating is the things that we see in the media are so false compared to reality. And I think we all know that to some degree, that the people that we're seeing on like the big screens or like in magazines, they don't actually look like that. They've been digitally manipulated. But it's easy to forget that when that's all you see, right? And I'm sure a lot of you have seen this. I have let me play this for you. The Dove Evolution ad, it's old at this point, but I think it's such a great example of how things are changed so much from came out like several years back, trying to raise awareness of what people actually look like versus what we see. Right. And again, I think most of us know that the images that we're seeing in magazines and so on aren't what that person actually looks like. But there's so much change, right? Like, so they make her look as good as you possibly can with makeup and hairstyling and all of that. But then they even take that picture, that like best version of herself, make the neck longer, the eyes bigger, suck everything in, every imperfection is gone. And then you see that billboard and you're like, oh my God, I don't look anything like that. Right. And it seeps in and it has that subtle effect when that's all you see of like, I'm not attractive because that is what is deemed attractive. I'll go back and look. Yeah.
And then imagine like, as the model sitting through all of that.
Yeah.
And like, put together as nicely as that, only to be like, no, that's not quite good enough, we gotta
Right.
actually tweak that even more.
Yeah.
Why don't we just AI generate models with it?
We're probably on our way there, right? And yeah, how sad for that model, right? Like I wasn't pretty enough. I was like the best version of me with all of that makeup and all of that. You still had to manipulate me to make me look better, better. Yeah.
I think that an example I personally noticed is actors in Bollywood films having lots of even possibly negative bias.
Oh, sure.
Is that
Mhm.
just
Yeah.
wondering what they do? There's one.
I don't know what they do, but yeah, sometimes their eyes are just wild, right? Like just completely unobtainably blue or whatever, right? It's just creating standards that aren't real, right? Whether it's eyes or weight or appearance, it's intense. And I don't know if any of you have ever seen a celebrity outside of like when they're in their like normal like realm. I worked at Starbucks like 20 years ago at this point, and Jennifer Aniston came in to the Starbucks. It was in the Valley. And I didn't even recognize her. She just looked like an average person, right? Like just totally normal. She was in like sweats and a hat and like probably trying to hide a little bit. But I didn't even recognize her. Like, and then you add all the makeup and like all getting all done up. She looks so different when you see her on like television, right? And that's often the case that we create these impossible standards that aren't even real. Right. And what they do then, as I mentioned, is have that effect of making people feel othered, right, where they don't see themselves in the media and then they feel unattractive. So there's narrow definitions of beauty, norms that value physical appearance over like personality or inner qualities and inner strengths. Our culture is very much about outward appearance, and we glorify thinness. There's even quite a bit of prejudice against people who are overweight. We tend to view people who are overweight as lazy and sloppy. They're less likely to get hired, less likely to be viewed as successful. We have a lot of like very intrinsic stereotypes about people who are overweight or very obese even. And so, oh gosh, it's such an old movie, but there was such a great interview with it. I don't know if any of you saw the movie Shallow Hal, the older movie. And is it, I always confuse them, Gwyneth Paltrow or Cameron Diaz, one of them, whoever it was, she's a very, very thin actress, had to be very, very heavy for this role. She wore a suit. And she said she wore the suit out for one day out into the world just to see how it would be different from her normal life. And there was this whole interview of her where she was just shocked at how people treated her, rude to her, and just so like different than they were to her as like her thin, normal, like attractive self, right? And so really wild the stereotypes and just those kind of stigmas that we have intrinsically about people who are overweight. And I think as a culture, we're starting to battle this a little bit. There's more and more like kind of different representations of weight and kind of pushback on this idea, but it's slow. It's something that's very, very slow to change. And I think what we saw is if you go back maybe like 10 years or so, we started to get this wave of kind of pushback against this norm of beauty being equated with thinness. And I have two songs that I want to play for you, and they're both a little bit older. If any of you have like a better, like new example, please share it with me by all means. But these are both really good ones. So I want to play like All About That Bass, which I'm so sorry if you have that stuck in your head for the rest of the day. My kids used to dance and sing to this song, but they got all the words wrong. So that's always in my mind. And then Try. So two songs that I think really started this wave of trying to fight some of these societal like norms around beauty and appearance. And some of it also for women specifically, you see in the second video, kind of centering around the norms of makeup and beauty as well, which is another kind of interesting side note of beauty. But let me pause this here and then I'm gonna play them for you and so on with both of them. I think there are some issues, especially with one of them, but I mean, any thoughts or like comments? Yeah.
I think it's definitely, I like that we're trying to include everyone in feeling beautiful, but there is always a consistent issue with like trying to only validate certain body types by over sexualizing them.
Sure.
And it's like, yeah, you're beautiful, but only because your butt is big. And so
Yeah.
you should shake it, you know? And so it's like,
Mhm.
instead of just like having these body types represented in like, I don't know, the center of a love story or like, you know, a love interest and not just like, oh, your body's so voluptuous, you know what I mean?
Right, and specifically like
All
one
of
part of
it.
your body,
Yeah,
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. I really liked the second video because it didn't have to do with sexualization. It was just like, this is who you are. Like,
Sure.
so that was my interpretation of the two.
Yeah, and I think you're completely right, like all about that base, it's glorifying one specific type of like bigger like body, right? And very over sexualizing. Yeah,
I think talking about what the overweight might be of the greater range, because I definitely think that there is a fetishization towards skinnier bodies, but obesity is a like, public health problem,
Mhm.
but obesity is a very complex issue, and it's
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point too. Other thoughts, other reactions to either of the videos or both the videos? Yeah.
I do, so I've heard this, I've heard both songs before.
Sure.
I always really liked it. And I really appreciate that emphasis on a genuineness and not having to push yourself until you bridge for the sake of kind of realizing the alignment always. No, I didn't struggle with body issues to nearly the same extent as I know about like especially body for me. But that line that like, why should you care what they think of you when you're all alone?
Mhm.
That strikes me as particularly hard hitting line.
Yeah.
And I do really appreciate that emphasis. You don't have, you shouldn't have to push yourself to an extreme just to appeal to people who don't even necessarily.
I like that, right? And I think what's interesting is the all about that bass song. It feels like, it's like, who cares? It's like, it feels like it's for other people in a way. And the try song feels like it's more for yourself, right? So I like that shift in focus between the two. Yeah.
Think of the songs that you want about like,
Yeah.
what they think of you. I also, and especially like, I don't know, like if like looks are survival almost. Like you just have to look okay because God forbid you look any different or have anything unique about you because then you're a target. And it's, I mean, I think it's a little less now, but definitely growing up, especially in middle school, if you were not typical, you were always a target. Because
Sure.
people are insecure and you project.
Mhm.
And so it's just like, okay, if I put on makeup and I get rid of this, then maybe the bullying will stop, or maybe it'll draw less attention to me. It's all just about survival. I can survive. My appearance is my survival. And that's how I can be safe. So I think a lot
Sure.
of people find their appearance and doing all that to be a safe place because it keeps them from being, targeted socially.
Yeah, especially in like middle school and high school, but that can continue, right? But especially in those very like delicate ages, right? Where it's like, please don't see me, like you want to almost be invisible in a way, and you be invisible by not doing anything to make yourself stand out, right? I think that's a good point. And that only kind of feeds into, right, every pun intended there, right? Feeding into these like ideas, right? Of that we have those very narrow definitions. If you stand out from them, whether it's weight or any other way, right, it can cause attention, which isn't always wanted. Any other thoughts or comments? I'm sorry, both of them are kind of more centered toward women. Again, if anyone has a different song or a newer one, like please send it to me. I would love it. I picture my girls like all singing the all about that bass song, like, and they used to do the little like framing their body thing, and that's when I was like, and we're done with this song, right? Like you're at the time they were like 4 and 6 or whatever. But I mean, that song I think is a little more like for, as I mentioned, for other people. kind of hating on people who are skinny too, right? Like, we talked about this a little bit last time. Some people are just naturally thinner, just like some people are naturally heavier, right? There's a bunch of different body types. And like, we oftentimes can't help our body type. So I don't think that song does any favors in hating on people who are thin. And the other song, right, we kind of bring in elements of like makeup and being who you are. But I think that's very much tied to what we consider attractive and body image and all of those things as well. So kind of a combination of everything, right? Like most disorders. But the more of these things that you have present or kind of interacting with you, the more likely you might be to have some struggles with eating disorder. Any other like stories or thoughts or comments, anything with any of these factors? Yeah.
Just real quick, try video that they included different ages.
Yeah.
And age range and like including them in the conversation of.
Yeah. I think so too. There's a much better diversity in that video. I have to tell you, and my friend would probably kill me for this, but in the back of my head, all I can ever think when I hear that song, my friend Josh used to go here for a time. He was getting like another degree. And he came by my office and I was playing that song and like getting the lyrics for a class. And he's like, why are you listening to that? And I was like, oh, it's for my class. And I explained. And he's like, I wish my wife would try a little harder. And I was like, oh, Josh, you just missed the whole point of the song, dude. And like, and then I texted her and told her, and she's mad at him, and it was great. But different time, right? But really funny in the back of my head, that's all I can think, right? I think that mentality is still there though, too, of like, you need to try, you need to put yourself out there like that. But a lot of pushback on that as well. So it's kind of an interesting path that we're on. We'll see where it goes. Let's talk a little bit about treatment of both. And then I have a little like case study that we'll do to just kind of pull all of this together at the end. But when it comes to treating anorexia and treating bulimia, the focus is a little bit different because the disorders are a little bit different. So with anorexia, where our main issue is somebody being really underweight and refusing to eat, the main goal here is trying to get them to a healthy weight. Now, this is really difficult to do if somebody is refusing to eat and they have a lot of like emotion around food and eating. But that's the first step, is we got to get this person to a healthier weight where they're not at risk to themselves. And you saw in that little documentary clip I played for you, people crying, people like finding ways to use the little like stomach bags to remove stuff rather than put stuff in. But, this can be a very challenging thing to do, but you're trying to get somebody to a weight where it's no longer dangerous to their health. And then try to then treat the issues that are kind of underlying it or related to it. Like, where is this coming from? Let's explore like some of the thoughts that you have and the ideas that you have, and treat any kind of psychological disorders or issues that might be like contributing, like the depression or low self-esteem or whatever might be there. Maybe somebody had trauma. And so there are like control things that we need to go back and look at. And then finally, trying to reduce or eliminate any behaviors or thoughts that might contribute to relapse. The relapse rates with this one and bulimia are really, really high. When people have stress, they tend to relapse. If people hit a certain weight, that's a trigger for them, they might relapse. People around you, right? Think again how often food is part of our lives. There are a lot of like relapse elements to these. And so looking at, are there certain people that you shouldn't be around as much? Are there certain times of day that are triggers for you? Like, what are the triggers and how can we maybe reduce them to help you not end up in a relapse spot? Similar with bulimia, but what we're trying to do with bulimia, it's very cyclical. It's like a very rewarding in terms of conditioning. Just like OCD, when we talked about OCD, you have to break the cycle of the thought to the behavior. Very similar here, right? You have to eliminate the binge purge pattern and get somebody to have better eating habits. Okay, so what you do is you have them binge, but you don't let them purge. And there might be a lot of tears and a lot of upset and a lot of struggle with that, but you need to help them learn to stop the eating during the binges and then stop the compensatory behaviors as a way to like break that cycle. And again, this might require hospitalization. It could be like where you go to like an inpatient facility somewhere. That's not uncommon with eating disorders, but you're doing a lot of breaking that pattern. There might be individual and group therapy or like behavioral therapy. Really common for people to be tasked with things like journaling. Like, I want you to write down what you ate and when. How did you feel after you ate it? How did you feel an hour later? What did you do in response to eating that? Like, kind of keeping a daily journal. You might consider medication if there's something that's driving it that we can maybe treat, like depression or anxiety or something like that. And again, a lot of issues with relapse, but a lot of people, if you can learn a better way, right, and learn to identify the thoughts and behaviors that are going on with it, that can be really, really helpful. But again, with both disorders and with all three disorders, really, we do see a lot of relapse, right? Especially over time, where people can kind of slowly fall back into old habits over time. I have a bunch of like books and documentaries that are related to this topic that I'll just kind of put up if you're interested. Some of them newer than others, like To the Bone, kind of the newest one that's up here. Some books that are really like easy reads, but are really interesting related to this, and then some documentaries. Finn was the one I showed you a little bit of a promo of, and they have it in the library. And then To the Bone was on Netflix, or came out on Netflix like a year or two ago, a couple of years ago. So I'll leave that up there. But what I want to do is I have a little case study that I found. This is somebody's like real story of some of the things that they went through. And so what I'd like to do is I'm going to give each one of you one of these, but I'd like you when you're done to get into groups and work on it together. That way you can kind of talk about it, right? So like 2, 3, 4 people, whatever's easy. If you'd rather do it by yourself, you're welcome to, but I think it's nice to have other people to kind of chat with about it. So I want you to read through this, and it's the front and a little bit on the back. And then on the back, there's a few questions about like identifying some signs and symptoms and how might we help this individual. So take a few minutes, read through it, and then find some people, and you can definitely do like bullets. You don't have to write like full sentences out. I'll give you a split. So again, take a few minutes to read through it. And then when you're done, find a few people and go ahead and answer the questions on the back. Make sure at some point you put all your names on whatever one sheet you're turning in as well. Oh, yeah. That's a really interesting. I got you. Yeah. I got that. Yeah, I think that's just. So again, once you finish, find a few people, get some thoughts down. You can turn in one sheet per group, if you'd like. Just put all of your first and last names on there. And again, I think most of you opted, or all of you opted to do it alone. You're like, it's Monday, I'm gonna be quiet to myself. But as you finish, I would at least like you to check with the people around you and kind of bounce those ideas off of them. I'll give you another like 5 minutes or so, and then we'll talk about it together. But if you would like to, feel free to chat with your neighbors about it. Give you a couple more minutes to get all your thoughts down and again, if you want to bounce them off the floor and. Most of you got down, and you want to need more time? Okay, so let's talk about this together. Let's start with number 2, right? So what are some of the signs that she has an eating disorder? Anyone willing to give me one? What's something that's going on in here that makes you worried about her eating, right? One sign, yeah.
Fear of being told not to adopt. It applies to her.
Okay, so that caused you to have some concern for her. Okay, you had your hand up too. How about for you?
Oh, just that, she has affected her liver by,
Yeah.
so
Mhm.
like her mom, to going on in the affected the liver, so that's pretty.
If she started to have some physical effects from it, right? It's affecting her physically, in addition to some of the emotions. How about for you? Peter?
Extra desires to be like, then even though knowing the rest of it,
Yeah,
she exercises some friends.
for sure, right? So she's doing a lot of like things related to weight. She's got a lot of mentality about it. She wants to be really, really thin. What are some other signs that you've done?
It said like eating less and eating like fat, very.
Sure. Right, really restricted eating, and then the things that she is eating, not getting a lot of nutrition from them. Yeah.
She actually starts to make herself throw up.
Yeah. Right, making herself sick, and being like really, like the excessive exercising and so on. Anything else, like for the first one, yeah? Yeah, right, having like hypothermia, right, because she's so thin that she's so underweight that she can't maintain any kind of warmth, yeah. Yeah, right. And being that hungry, to be so hungry that you're in tears about it, but you don't eat, right? I mean, that's definitely something that we should worry about, right? You see a lot of those signs, right? But I think this is a really good example, and we were talking about this previously. She doesn't fit anorexia perfectly, right? Like her symptoms don't necessarily fit it perfectly because she is doing some purging and compensatory behaviors. And that's really common with eating disorders, that somebody doesn't fit anorexia or bulimia like cleanly. And so sometimes we'll like specify or diagnose with both even, or like a not otherwise specified kind of thing. What are some things that might have influenced it, right? There's a lot of things that you could add here. What are some of the things that played a role? Yeah.
So weight, the example, and also like TV and magazines and all that stuff.
Sure, right, yeah, the name calling, there's a lot of comments in here about her weight, right, that could easily be contributing. Anybody else, other thoughts? Yeah, and then I'll go back here.
Public humiliation from an adult figure. That's
Yeah.
has to like protect you.
Right,
Yeah.
right, somebody who's supposed to have your back and
Yeah.
instead, right, the YMCA, person who made an example out of her. That's a good example. Yeah.
Getting weight that really bothers me.
Yeah, all right. The shopping's a big one, right? Clothes sizes and like shopping, and the availability of clothes all of a sudden to her, like being rewarding. Yeah,
I was gonna say about rewarding, big concern that I was, as soon as she started to lose weight, she said, it felt very rewarding.
yeah,
And I was starting to worry that she might be getting like heavy dopamine hits every time she would go down in size.
Right.
And continuing that not just because of bullying, but also because she from to an extreme, which that I don't know what concerns me more, the fact that she's going into this state, or the fact that she now finds it more interesting in this state.
they're both concerning, right? In their own way. And so much of our behavior, good behavior, bad behavior, neutral behavior, just behavior in general, so much of it is conditioning. Right? What are we rewarded for or punished for? No reaction is still a conditioned response, right? When people don't say anything or don't do anything, right? That neutrality can also be rewarding at times, kind of like you were saying with not being seen earlier, right? The lack of response can sometimes be rewarding. So as she gets rewarded and feels good, right? That only fuels it even more. What are some other things? I think there's still a couple more you could add. Yeah.
If her boyfriend only does, like, you start to get on the scale.
Yeah, right. Like could make her feel like, oh, well, he's finding me like attractive as I'm losing weight or having issues with me being heavier. Yeah, that definitely the interpersonal piece. Did you have one as well, or was that yours? Ah, he took it, right? Other thoughts? Anything else that you want to add? Obviously, we talked about a ton of them, but like those we could easily add in here, but the bullying, the relationships, the reinforcement and conditioning. How could we help her? Now, she obviously goes through some stuff. But what are some of the things that like either in here or that we could do to help her? Can you think of anything? Yeah,
Definitely talk therapy to go through drowning trauma.
yeah.
And please suggest that. Also, like you said earlier, like journaling when you feel triggered to do certain behavior, you know, kind of identify what is getting this, like what is making me get into this mindset?
Yeah.
Or I want to start doing the same behavior that's hurtful to me. So I would say those two things for sure.
Yeah, finding the root of it, talking through that, identifying that. I know journaling seems like such a, like my instant reaction to journaling is like, yeah, journaling, right? Like I kind of an eye roll, but it can be an incredibly helpful thing to do, to identify like, what are your thoughts when you pick up a piece of food or you're hungry? Like, what are the things that are popping into your head in that moment? Let's get them down so we can pick them apart, right, later. And like, it is actually an incredibly helpful thing to do, something I often assign to clients. I even assign it to my daughter. She'll roll her eyes at me, but that's okay. I make her do it. My daughter, Emma, who's in therapy for like anxiety stuff and skin picking stuff, we're like, I want you to write down or draw, like she'll draw pictures of how she felt, right, in that moment or something that was on her mind. Those are really helpful things to do that a therapist can then kind of pick apart with you when you're in that like setting. Anything else that you wrote down? Anything else there? Yeah. 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 I love that, right? Group therapy is wonderful for that. It gives you a support group, and everyone in that group knows how profound it is when you ate something but didn't throw it up, or, you know, actually ate a full meal that day. Like there's this camaraderie and support that develops. Group therapy can be really wonderful for certain things. And this group of disorders is definitely one of them. A lot of group therapy, it's kind of the norm, right? So people don't feel so alone. It's a big part of your suffering is that you feel alone with it. And so having that source of support could be helpful. We could try and go back and when we do the talk therapy, identify if there's maybe any like issues we could medicate or like help her with there. I think overall it's just kind of sad. Like it has a sad like ending to it even, right? You see again that relapse, how hard it is to break the cycle, right? And I read maybe like 10 of these before I picked one of them. And I like that this one ends with some of that relapse because it's honestly, it's realistic, right? This is something that, you know, this individual will probably have to continue to battle. And a lot of us show warning signs of these things, but it doesn't ever escalate, right? Or maybe we have it and then we're able to get it under control. So very common group of disorders. Any other thoughts about her or about anything with eating disorders before I collect it? We move on. Okay, if you want to make sure your first and last name is on there, and then I'll pick you up with that, and then we'll go from there. Or you can go ahead now, actually.
Wonder, would it be a hindrance or helpful to like list everything you're eating in a day, so you can see how little it is objectively instead of emotionally?
It can be helpful, right?
Or would it be
more-
for, yeah, like a sense of relief? So what she's eating.
So oftentimes people who do have, sorry, go ahead. Oftentimes people who do have eating disorders are very aware of what they eat, don't eat, and how many calories and so on. There's a lot of like apps that allow you to track that very, very easily. And that can be helpful, thank you, for like weight loss or weight gain. But it might be really helpful to see how many calories are you actually putting in your body? What do you actually need to put in your body? And you know, being like, say your average calorie intake should be 1,500 calories and you're eating like 400. That can be a real eye opener.
Right.
Right, or somebody who's binging, like, oh, you ate 4,000 calories today, which is my plan for Saturday. But that's okay, that's another note. But like, say you ate way too many calories and be like, okay, well, this is why you're gaining weight. Let's see if we can get it down to a more like typical number. I actually think that could be really helpful. And it's probably something that someone's already doing to a degree if they have one of these eating disorders pretty like prominent, right? And there's nothing wrong with tracking what you're eating. A lot of people do that, and there's nothing wrong with it at all. But it can become problematic when it goes too far, right? Like anything. But I think that could be helpful for sure. I like it. Right. Did I get them all? Anybody else? Skip your papers. Okay. So we'll start this just a little bit. Chapter 10. Chapter 10 is actually relatively brief. It's really only like 1 or 2 disorders. But we'll get into it just a tiny bit. And then I want to spend a little bit of time, as I mentioned earlier, talking about kind of like our upcoming days and making sure everything is clear. And if you have questions about the paper and all that stuff. But chapter 10, kind of some similar threads here, but now we're looking at substance related disorders. So instead of disorders related to eating, this is disorders related to substances. So kind of a quick introduction to substances. We won't go into that much. It's not really the focus of this class. What we'll focus on mainly are what are the main disorders that somebody can have, and then looking at some causes and treatments and so on. And then I have a case study that we'll do for this one on Wednesday to kind of pull it together. So when it comes to drugs, right, a psychoactive drug is any chemical substance that changes your mood or your perception. This is an absolutely massive amount of substances. This is everything from like coffee and caffeine and like, you know, cold medicine, Tylenol, like benign, like mild things, to like heroin and LSD and marijuana and alcohol to antidepressants. This is anything that you put into your system that alters your mood or your perception or your state of mind. And I think what's so tricky about substances is everybody reacts to them differently. Every single person has a different reaction to substances. And it depends on how many you have, how often you have them, your body chemistry, right? I have a cup of coffee like nearly every morning, right? Like by the time I get here, I just have my water. I drink my coffee before on the way here, right? But I have coffee like every morning. It's like, it's normal to me. And I see lots of like coffees and energy drinks, right? It's very common for people to drink coffee. But even coffee can become problematic when it goes too far, or maybe you feel lousy if you don't have it, or you're spending too much money on it. I have some friends, like I don't see them much anymore, but it was like you could tell when their caffeine wore off and you didn't want to be around them, right? And like they could tell eventually too, right? And so even things as benign as caffeine can be challenging and have different reactions. My partner can drink a cup of coffee in bed and then fall asleep. Like if I have coffee after like 2, I won't sleep that night, right? So just again, everybody has different chemistry. We all react very differently. And when we take a substance, it can be something that's very temporary, that it causes some temporary changes in your behavior and emotion or thought, or it could be something that's kind of more long-term and problematic. A lot of people use a substance every now and then, and they're fine. You drink a cup of coffee every morning, doesn't interfere with your life, you're okay. Right? Or maybe it causes very minimal issues. You use marijuana at night to help you sleep, right? Like maybe CBD or CBN or something like that to help you sleep, and it doesn't interfere and it's not problematic. But for others, it can lead to some really big maladaptive patterns of behavior that interfere with your life, that cause problems, cause losses of relationships, get you into trouble legally, put you in dangerous situations. And so it's kind of a whole spectrum, right? But know that a lot of people can use a substance periodically and be okay, right? But it can obviously escalate depending on a lot of factors. In general, there are kind of three main categories of drugs, and I'm not going to spend much time here, but I do want to introduce them. Anyone in here taken the neuro psych class yet? A few of you, maybe some of you, it's on your list of things to take. It's a tough one, right? Neuropsych is a tough but interesting, and statistics, that's the other one that people often put off, or research methods, right? I teach research methods and statistics, so I like those, but those tend to be the hard ones that people dread. But in the neuropsych class, you would learn a lot more about how these work, how they affect our system. Specifically, for here, just know that there are kind of three main categories of drugs, and it's not clean, but that's how we tend to divide it up. Depressants are drugs that slow you down, right? They depress or slow down your system. They slow down your thinking, they slow down your behavior. There's a ton of these. Here's some of the common ones: alcohol, sedative hypnotic drugs like barbiturates and benzodiazepines, Xanax, Valium, things that are often used for anxiety. Opioids, right? Anything derived from like the opium poppy, like morphine, heroin, even our body's natural endorphins. All of these drugs, when we use them, depress our system and slow us down, right? So that's one category. Another category are the stimulants, and these are the ones that speed us up, right? They stimulate, hence the name, the sympathetic nervous system and give you feelings of energy. They oftentimes make it where it's hard to sleep, maybe optimism and happiness, oftentimes followed by a crash, right? Which tends to make them addictive because people feel good. And then when they wear off, you need more of it to keep that feeling, right? And so these are things like cocaine, amphetamines, ecstasy, nicotine, caffeine, right? Energy drinks would fall into here, which are really common and popular. A lot of drugs in the stimulant category, caffeine being like a super common one, again, that a lot of us tend to use. But these drugs stimulate your sympathetic nervous system and speed you up. And then finally, the hallucinogens, which are ones that distort your visual and auditory perception, right? So maybe you see or hear things that aren't there. They distort your perception of time. This one tends to include things like marijuana and LSD, and of course others. Marijuana is an interesting one in that sometimes it's categorized as a depressant, but it fits best here because it does have like a mild hallucinogenic property to it if it contains THC, right? THC is that like main active ingredient in marijuana that tends to create that high or that distortion. It's the most frequently used illegal drug in the United States. And it kind of depends on what state you live in to how legal it is and how much is legal and so on. But this one tends to be kind of an interesting hybrid drug that can have stimulant properties depending on the strain, or even sedative properties depending on the strain. But we tend to put it here. So the essence of like this is that there are a lot of different categories of drugs, a ton of different substances, but when you use and abuse them, they can lead to disorders, right? Disorders like substance use disorders or even substance-induced disorders. And I have a little video that introduces these, so I'll play that for you, and then we'll probably stop shortly after that. But we can have like a very short-term use, which we call intoxication. It's temporary, or it can develop into a substance use disorder or pattern, or it can be that you get a disorder as a result of using the substance. And we'll talk through all of those, obviously. But let me play this little introduction for you. I think it kind of, I think it's a nice like little introduction to, right, what are the different symptoms? And those are things that we'll talk more about next time. But there's a big difference between a short-term temporary, like being intoxicated from the use of a substance, to something that's much more long-term and problematic, right? And so there really are only two disorders, and that's what we'll really focus on a lot on Wednesday. Yeah. It depends on the person, but there are a lot of people who tried a drug once or twice and they're okay, right? They don't become addicted to it. They don't crave it. It was like an isolated event. There are a lot of people who use milder drugs and they're okay, and it doesn't become a dependence of any kind. It really depends on the person, but there are a lot of people who use even more like intense drugs periodically and don't ever become addicted. A lot of it is like your genetics or, you know, how the events in your life. We'll talk more about that next time. But yeah, a lot of people can use them periodically and be okay. So what I want to do, my last minutes here, and we'll pick up with this on Wednesday. So I wrote this out, right? Your diagnosis paper is due on Wednesday. Remember, I pushed it back a week. A few of you already turned it in. And if you're done with it, by all means, turn it in. But your diagnosis paper part 2 is due this Wednesday by 11:59 p.m. Okay, it needs to be like 2 to 3 pages. You can always go over. I will never take points off for going over. I was always that student that went over, so I never mind if you do it, it's fine. It's better to give me too much than not enough. If it's short of 3 pages, probably didn't give me enough. Okay, so give me like 2 to 3 pages of progress. Again, it can be an outline, it can be bulleted, maybe you wrote a couple of paragraphs and some of it's bulleted. I'm not so much worried about the formatting, I just want to see progress. And the biggest part, as I pointed out before, that source, that academic source is worth 10 points. So the DSM, an article, a journal article or a book, any of those would be acceptable. But that's due by Wednesday night, so I can remind you again on Wednesday. Yeah, any questions?
Same article, could it be secondary literature,
How do you mean, like?
like reporting on study?
Yeah, so if you read the study, right, or like the journal article that was talking about the study, that would still be. And if you ever want to check with me, you're more than welcome to. In general, anything that's like .com, .org, .whatever, online sources like that aren't always going to be. So a couple more things. I still give me a few more minutes just so I don't feel. I promise. Right? You're all like, it's almost time. I'm ready. So paper due on Wednesday. Wednesday we'll also finish up chapter 10 and do a case study and kind of wrap up that chapter. And then I won't see you for 2 weeks after that. Part of that is spring break and part of that is me. I planned it real well. I'm a planner, right? So our second exam is on Monday. Okay, so normally what would have happened is we wouldn't have had class and we would have had the exam. So that doesn't change. So on Monday, the 25th, which is a week from today, you'll have exam number 2. It'll open up at 12:01 a.m. on Canvas and close at 11:59 p.m. So just like the first exam, you have a study guide. We wouldn't have had in-person class anyway. I will be in Cabo that day, I believe. I'll think of you. That's not very nice. I know you'll be taking me. And anything that you turn in during this week, I obviously won't be able to grade it. I won't have internet at all and put like an away message out there, but you'll have the exam on Monday. And then on Wednesday, we won't have class, but I am going to give you a short assignment, right? It'll be up on Canvas. It shouldn't take you more than maybe 20 minutes to do, but just so that we can keep moving and not fall too far behind. And then I didn't have to bring in a sub, which would just be weird to have a sub in the middle. I'm like, you're mine. I'm not sharing you. I'm sharing you with guest people. But that's my own possessiveness. But so on Wednesday, next week, we won't have class. I'll send out announcements to remind you of all of this, but I just want to put it in your head. And there will be a short assignment that you'll turn in on Canvas on a chapter that I always give an assignment with, which is chapter 11 on sex and gender disorders, which are a little beyond like the scope of this class, in my opinion. So I don't normally cover them anyway. I have a video for you that I made and there'll be a short assignment. And then the following week is spring break, right? And so you get a nice week off for it. I know everyone is waiting for that desperately. It's coming. It's very, very soon. So that is kind of our plan. Again, Wednesday, we'll wrap this up. The paper is due, Monday the exam, and then next Wednesday, no class. Any questions about any of that? I'm gonna remind you one more time on Wednesday, but any questions about any of those things? I'll hang out for a few minutes if you do have them. Otherwise, have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you on Wednesday. Yeah, what's up? How do I access what?